Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Morphy's with a very cool, very rare submachine gun. This is a Japanese Type 100, complete with its magazine, and of course, fitted with a bayonet, because the Japanese put bayonet lugs on everything, which means when I film them, I have to put bayonets on everything. Now, these are really scarce submachine guns because not a lot survived World War II, but not a lot were made in the first place, which brings up an interesting fundamental question, which is, why didn't the Japanese really embrace the submachine gun? You would think, like, relatively small military, they're fighting in a lot of jungle terrain in the Pacific. China, not so much, but you'd think this would be a force that would really understand the firepower capabilities of the submachine gun and really embrace it. And yet they didn't. Now, it appears a lot of the inspiration or a lot of the push for this gun came out of experiences specifically in Shanghai in the late 1930s. Many of the Chinese warlords did appreciate submachine guns. They just weren't able to get all that many, but there were some being manufactured in China, which the Japanese got firsthand experience with. And that seems to have led the push to actually adopt a Japanese submachine gun. Before that, there had been plans. 1920, the Japanese had plans for a submachine gun, sort of a testing protocol, and let's look at what's out there and see what maybe we can buy. And that all kind of falls apart. The Tokyo Arsenal comes up with some prototype submachine guns in the late 1920s. They're all failures. Kijiro Nambu is the shining star of Japanese small arms development. He's the one responsible for the Nambu pistols, as well as many of the Japanese machine guns, which there's sort of a general attitude that Japanese World War II firearms were all weird crap. Japanese machine guns were actually excellent guns. They're well engineered, they're well designed, they're well made, they're really good guns. And they're mostly the result of Kijiro Nambu. The domestic designs anyway. So 1930, he sets his sights on submachine gun design, but even at this point, it's clearly not a high priority project. He spends like 7 years working through two different patterns. His first one is a bullpup. It's a complicated mechanism. It doesn't do well. 1934, he iterates that into a standard configuration gun, but it's still weirdly complex, and now he's got it chambered for this proprietary 6.5mm cartridge. It's not so great. 1937, he takes that gun and actually puts it in 8mm Nambu, the standard Japanese pistol ammunition, which it's a kind of an underpowered cartridge, but at least now it's in the regular cartridge that the Army and the Navy actually use. But even then, the gun's still too complex. It's not effective. Then, as I was talking about, we get this, what appears to have been some push from experiences in Shanghai with the Japanese occupation of Shanghai. The fighting in China intensifies in the late 1930s, and that's when you get at least a group in the Japanese military advocating for the use of submachine guns. So they will ultimately purchase a couple of different designs. They purchase Bergmann 1920s from SIG. That's essentially the German MP28. They purchase, I believe, some Steyr MP34s as well. And a lot of these are being used by elite specialist groups. The Special Naval Landing Force, in particular, gets submachine guns. Some of the sort of the raider commando type guys get submachine guns. But that stands in significant contrast to most of the other armies of the world, where submachine guns initially are issued to officers. Not so much elite troops, but officers get the submachine guns, and then it democratizes into as many people as we can give these things, especially if you're in the Russian army. In Japan, the officers were never the ones with submachine guns because the officers had swords, and while it's perhaps a bit cliche, the idea that Japan had a blade-centric martial culture is also true, and it really did have an impact on their small arms decisions. Not just because they put blades on everything. The submachine guns have bayonet lugs, the light machine guns have bayonet lugs, these guys have bayonet lugs on them, but also I think there really was this idea in the Japanese military that if you're going to be fighting in close quarters, you use a blade, a knife. It's quiet, it's effective, it fits the culture, and they preferred that to a submachine gun. And I really think that is part of the reason, perhaps a very significant part of the reason, why there wasn't more Japanese embracing of submachine guns in general. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track here. Let's get back to this particular one, the one they actually did build and use. In 1940, Nambu starts over from scratch, maybe 39, designs basically a traditional sort of simple blowback open bolt submachine gun. It's his Model 3. The Japanese military tests it, they find it acceptable, and they adopt it as the Type 100. Now, that's the 1940 pattern. This is the 1944 pattern. The 40 goes into production. Not a lot of them are made. Development continues, again, very slowly, and by 1944, they've significantly simplified the gun. And they have a new pattern, which is this. And most of the ones that are available in the US are these 1944 pattern guns. So let's take a closer look and let me show you how this works. There are some definitely unique Japanese elements to it. I'm gonna start back here with the markings. This looks like 100, and it actually is, but you read it this direction. 1 in the Japanese script is a horizontal line. So 100 shiki, or type, says Type 100. There was no differentiation in designation between the early and the late patterns here. We have our serial number. This one is 2386, and that little stylized fighting fish is the Nagoya Arsenal mark. There is no fire selector here. It is full auto only, which is not uncommon on blowback submachine guns. There is a safety located right in the front of the trigger guard. So forward is safe, that locks the trigger. Rearward is the fire position. It is a simple open bolt blowback submachine gun, and it has this curved side-mounted magazine. Now the magazine is curved because 8mm Nambu is a bottlenecked case that requires a curved magazine like this to properly stack, and it's side-mounted probably primarily because the other submachine guns the Japanese were used to using had side-mounted magazines. So the Bergmann 1920s, the Steyr 1934s, those are both side-load mags. There are rationales to that. You can get nice and low to the ground with them. Keep in mind, that's something the Japanese liked. The Type 11 Hotchkiss light machine guns and the 96 and 99 Nambus all had top feeding systems, and it was appreciated how low you could get to the ground with them. So they went with side on this guy. We have a magazine release right here on the side. So push that lever in, and you can pull the magazine out. It's a double feed, double stack magazine, holds 30 rounds. Now you can see the magazine's kind of crudely made here. There's some numbers stamped on it. Doesn't appear to be a matching magazine, but it is a magazine that fits because, by the way, the 1940 and the 1944 patterns of gun have magazines that look the same but are not actually interchangeable. Actually, kind of like the FG42 again there. Anyway, you can see that they folded the front 3 sides of the magazine, and then the back plate of the magazine is welded in place here. So like, this is not really good, efficient, high-volume manufacturing going on. We have a kind of cool compensator design here with a hole on the left and a big open slot on the right that is presumably to help push the gun to the left. You get more gas coming out this side, which if you're shooting right-handed, the gun's going to tend to pull up this way, so this counteracts it. Kind of the equivalent of why there are slant brakes on AKs that are not indexed perfectly vertical, but they actually cant over to one side. Our front sight is this windage adjustable triangular barleycorn right there. We've got a bayonet lug on the bottom. The 1940s are most easily visually distinguished by this extra sort of underlug underneath the barrel shroud that the bayonet hooks onto. So it's a little hard to explain that, but you'll know it if you see it. And at some point here, I will do a video on a 1940 pattern. Coming back here, we have some like square lugs of material here. This goes back to the 1940 pattern gun where there was some extra mechanical stuff up here that they simplified and got rid of, but they were already making the trunnions. By the way, note we have a tubular receiver back here that's nested into a machined trunnion. They were already making the trunnions, so rather than waste time getting rid of these, they just left them on and didn't use them the way they originally had. Charging handle here, it's simple. There is no safety position for this. Usually World War II submachine guns, you'll have a position where you can somehow lock the bolt handle back so that if you hit the back of the gun and the bolt bounces open, it won't just chamber and fire a cartridge accidentally. A Type 100 will, at least a 44 pattern, will chamber and fire a cartridge accidentally like that. Doesn't have a good safety mechanism. Part of this simplification and improvement process was also intended to increase the rate of fire of the gun, and did. The early 1940 pattern Type 100s fired a rate of about 450 rounds a minute, which is pretty darn slow. This, the later Type 1944 pattern, is more like 800 rounds a minute. So you can actually see the scorching down here, below the ejection port where cases are coming out. The rear sight is actually kind of like the late pattern Thompson rear sights. It's fixed in place. You've got an aperture for close range, and then you've got an open notch for longer range, and that's probably 50 and 100 meters, I would suspect. We've got an Arisaka style buttstock here. Note the line right there. This is made in two parts. They're dovetailed together back here, and that was done to make more efficient use out of wood. I mean, all of the Arisaka rifles do that, and so they just copied that mechanism for the submachine guns. The butt plate is essentially the same as an Arisaka. The sling here, by the way, is an American sling that appears to be pretty much the same age as the gun. This is a vet bringback sling. I don't know for sure, but I suspect this is a sling that the original vet put on it. Now, we've got this D-ring thing here, which is pretty cool. This is, like, the takedown on the Type 100 is awesome. What you do is pull this back. It goes through to that pin, so when I pull it back, you can see lift out there. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and that allows me to just lift the receiver out of the stock. So what we have is a round and, well, a flat-sided peg right there that locks into this circular lug. And at the front, we just have a round peg there and a hook there. So really easy to take the stock off. There's not much going on in here. We do have the trigger mechanism in there. You pull the trigger, it drops the sear there. That's it. That's all there is to it. And it's kind of interesting that it is a round, it's a cylindrical firing sear. That's a little bit unusual to see. To open up the rest of the gun, we've got this lever. We're just going to rotate this around to the rear like that. It's a keyed pin, so it will pull out. Once it comes out, then the recoil spring and guide rod and end plug come out. So we got a lot of spring. The spring has taken a little bit of set up at the front. There's the spring. This is the guide rod and receiver cap, and it's got this last sort of extra buffer spring at the end, so that if you have ammunition powerful enough to put the bolt all the way back to the end of the receiver, this will absorb the last bit of impact instead of the cross pin absorbing it. Now I can bring the bolt back here, pull out the bolt handle, which is very simple, and pull out the bolt itself, which is also very simple. Really nothing to this. It's cut here to pick up a cartridge off of the side-mounted magazine. Got your ejector at the top right there, extractor, got a firing pin in there. The firing pin is actually threaded into place, so those two square holes allow you to use a special tool to unscrew the firing pin protrusion so that it can be changed if necessary. That is the round recess where the firing sear sits. So when this is in the gun, it sits like that, ready to fire. When you pull the trigger down, then it can go forward. And of course, we have the bayonet lug. This is a separate bayonet, doesn't come with this gun. But the Type 100 fits the standard Japanese Type 30 bayonet. That's the same bayonet that goes on everything else. All of the Arisaka rifles, the Nambu light machine guns. The Japanese did have one standard bayonet. There you go. There's the whole thing field stripped. There's really not much to a late pattern Type 100. It's a very simple submachine gun, easy to make, and yet they didn't make all that many of them. Now, production numbers are hard to get because these are very scarce, the records are not well kept, something like 8,000 of these guns were actually manufactured, which is a tiny drop in the bucket. That's, in terms of actual production numbers, that's pretty much on par with German FG-42s. So if you think about how rare those are today, well, the Japanese Type 100s were made in about the same quantity. And probably a lot fewer of them survived, because there are a lot of them that got destroyed or are rusting away as relics on Japanese islands, well, ex-Japanese islands in the Pacific. Now, some of these did come back to the US. Basically, all the ones we have are World War II vet bringbacks. And interestingly, the magazines are, if anything, scarcer than the actual guns, because in a lot of cases, like with Japanese light machine guns, it was totally cool to bring home a Japanese submachine gun as a trophy, as a souvenir. But if you were coming back on a ship, and most of the troops did, the Navy wasn't so keen on having Army guys and Marines running around the boat with live captured weapons. You know, they're getting drunk, they're getting into fights on these long boat trips home. And so what the Navy would often do is chuck magazines and or bolts over the side into the water when you boarded the ship. Like, you can have your Nambu light machine gun, but the magazine's going into Tokyo Bay. Same thing with the submachine guns. And so the fact that the two different patterns don't use the same interchangeable magazines doesn't help things, but it's really cool to be able to get this with an original working magazine with it. Anyway, I have been rambling on a bit now, but that's because the Type 100 is such a rare, cool submachine gun, and I'm very excited to have been able to finally bring this to you guys on camera. So big thanks to Morphe's for having this, making this accessible to me, where I can film it for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Someone is going to take this home and be, I hope, very happy with it, because it's a really good example of the type. Thanks for watching.